My name is Peter Savage, and I do work on a canal restoration project, not far from here, just a little way south of here, kind of around the villages of Whitminster, Eastington, close to Stonehouse. It's the Stroudwater Canal, and there's a section of that that's being restored, and it can't be kind of completed by any one organisation. So there's a partnership that have come together to deliver the restoration. That partnership is called Cotswold Canals Connected, and the Wildlife Trust are a partner. So we are kind of leading and advising on all of the environmental work that happens as part of that restoration. So I'm going to kind of give a bit of an update and an introduction to tell you how we're involved and the kind of the progress of that stage of the restoration. But I don't want to bore you too much with all of that because there's loads of amazing wildlife as well, and we've only got about an hour. So I'll run through a bit of the update on the project. I will go into some of the wildlife in some detail and some of the habitats along the canal, and then we'll hopefully have some time at the end for some questions and a bit of a chat. However, if you've got questions halfway through while I'm talking, just pop your hand up. I'm happy to answer them. Depends how detailed they are on some of the wildlife. My knowledge is okay. I'm better at water voles. I've been working closely with water voles for the last 3 years. Ask me questions on those by all means. Fish and tree knowledge is okay. Apart from that, my knowledge is sketchy, so I'll do what I can. So I kind of lead sometimes by talking about the Wildlife Trust and a Wildlife Trust's involvement with a canal. Because I grew up in Norfolk, and when I was growing up, we didn't actually have canals in Norfolk. We've got the Norfolk Broads. We didn't have canals. And when I pictured a canal, I pictured something like the image on the left there. Steel pile edges, concrete, maybe stone towpaths, cut grass cut to within an inch of its life. I didn't really think of them as amazing wildlife habitats. So I saw this job opportunity that came up, and I thought, oh well, I'd love to be involved with making the habitats better. But one of the great things about the Stroudwater Canal and the area that the Wildlife Trust are working on is that it's naturally, well, it's not naturally clay lined, but there's a lot of clay in the area, and the canal is actually clay lined. So when it was dug in the 1790s, I believe, the workmen actually lined it with clay, trampled it all down, which means that, well, it would be quite difficult to grow reeds and sedges and wildflowers in these banks. But this is actually a section of the Stroudwater Canal here that I work on. And as you can see, the habitats are quite amazing. So there's real potential with the restoration of this canal in particular, that we can enhance the habitats, but also create a wonderful wildlife corridor for plants, invertebrates and vertebrates to travel up and down. If I'm not speaking loud enough, just put your hand up and tell me to speak up. I can go louder than this. Now, I don't know how familiar you all are with the area. This is a sort of a brief into the geography of the area. Over here, this town is Stonehouse, a little way south of here. And then as you travel west from Stonehouse, you've got the M5 motorway. This is the A38, which passes very close to Whitminster. And then as you continue west, you've got Saul Junction. And this line here is the Gloucester Sharpness Canal, which goes up to Gloucester Docks. And the blue line is this phase of the restoration, Cotswold Canals Connected 1B. The canal runs into Stonehouse and Stroud and on. It's at various stages of restoration, but largely as you go through Stonehouse and Stroud, it looks like a fairly restored canal. There's boats going up and down it occasionally, not many, but there are a few. And it looks navigable and sections of it are navigable. But if you had a boat in there, you wouldn't be able to get to any other canals, you're stuck. So the aim is, and the desire for organisations like the Cotswold Canals Trust, is to link the Stroudwater Canal in Stroud and Stonehouse to the rest of the navigable network that is mostly operated by the Canal and River Trust. So this 4.5 mile section here is the shortest distance to travel to get to the main navigation at the Gloucester Sharpness Canal. And we've got 3 sections that we're working on. So going from the left of the screen, the light blue, around the area of Whitminster and Frampton, that's section 1, and it's very rural, lots of farmland around there. There aren't many properties close to the canal, lots of dog walkers at the moment. With the canal opening up, we might get an increase in footfall. Certainly there's going to be a nice towpath along there, so we'll be encouraging people to come out and enjoy the canal. Most people that use the canal come out to experience the wildlife, and there's certainly an abundance of it in that section. Over here, sort of near the Eastington, getting towards Stonehouse section, section 3, this kind of looks a bit like it does in Stonehouse and Stroud. It kind of looks like a navigable canal. There's a few locks to do bits and pieces to, bits of restoration to do, but it's largely complete. There's some bridges that need some work, but this section is largely complete. Yeah, thinking about it, there is a major bridge that needs replacing over here. So there's still work to do there. And then in the middle, section 2, this is what we're calling the missing mile. If you were to walk across here to try and look for the canal, you wouldn't find it. You wouldn't find any evidence of it, in fact. When they built the motorway and this road here, the A419, they filled in the canal. So there's approximately 1 mile where it doesn't exist. So that needs to be excavated. Locks need to be installed. Huge undertaking that needs to be done there. So that's a kind of a rough geography of the area that I work on. This doesn't work. Excuse me, I'll just have to keep walking across the screen. So just sort of a rundown on why the Wildlife Trust are involved and what we're doing. First of all, it's a huge project. It should be called a programme, really. There's 126, at last count, 126 separate engineering projects on that section of the restoration alone, on 1B. So they can be quite small. They can be from repointing a bridge or replacing a couple of bricks or something like that. But those projects can be as big as the M5 crossing. We're going to have to dig under the M5 and go under the motorway. So massive project. So then they can be anything in between. The photo is a lock, and just out of screen to the left there's a bund, and then there's farmers' fields. So the lock is kind of isolated there. That needs major restoration work. So lots and lots of technical engineering projects, which luckily I have nothing to do with the engineering side. I wouldn't know what I was doing there. But we advise on things like timing of the works. If there's protected species, then we can liaise with ecologists to make sure everything is done properly according to environmental best practice. So also there is a large-scale engineering programme which is creating and enhancing the habitats that already exist along the canal, but maybe adding to them as well, looking for opportunities with neighbouring land within a kilometre of the canal to see if we can enhance what's already being done. The creation of the canal and the missing mile is going to be a wonderful habitat, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. But on top of that, there's pockets of good habitats like traditional orchards, maybe wetlands, woodlands, and ancient hedgerows. And what we're looking at is opportunities to expand on those and to connect them. So where you've got a traditional orchard here and a wonderful ancient woodland here, and then farmers' fields in between that are heavily ploughed and got pesticides used on them, and etc., we can create hedgerows across to link those habitats up. So we're looking at opportunities to plant hedgerows and install built habitats and things like that. And on top of this, we're also acquiring 21 hectares of land where we are carrying out habitat creation, habitat restoration, and that land at the moment has been purchased by the Canal Project. It's owned by the Stroud District Council technically, but it's going to come under Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust ownership when we part with the project, which will probably be in just over a year's time. So that's really, really exciting. So there's amazing opportunities here. I realised just now, actually, at the beginning, I didn't introduce who the other project partners are. So it's led by the Stroud District Council. They're the lead partner in this project. They're the accountable body. And really the restoration has been driven for the last 52 years by Cotswold Canals Trust. They formed 52 years ago with the desire to connect up the Stroud Water Canal back up to the network. And then there's other partners involved. Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust lead on the environmental work, which I've mentioned, Stroud Valleys Project, Cotswold Boat Mobility, Stroud Water Navigation, Archives Charity, and then there's lots of other smaller organisations that are coming in with their input. So many different organisations assisting with this. So I'm going to give an example on those 3 bullet points on how we're assisting. This is one way. I mentioned water voles early on. So just an example of how we're working with the engineers. If the engineers are planning a project, like let's say they're replacing a bridge, the bridge is too low or it's not working and it needs replacing, then we can advise on what work needs to be done. With protected species, there are quite a few that live along the canal. I think everyone was really worried about great crested newts at the beginning, and luckily we don't have them in the canal. They've been surveyed heavily and we don't have any, which is, it's a shame because great crested newts are wonderful to have, but it's good news for the engineers, I must say. But we do have water voles. Still Britain's fastest declining mammal. And we're lucky that in the canal and in the River Frome and the ditches and the habitats around that area, we do have a regionally significant population of them, which for me, again, is great for the engineers. It's not stopping them from carrying out the restoration, but by law, because of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, they are a protected species. So we need to ensure that any work we do around water voles and their habitats is done under a class licence, and it has to be done at certain times of the year. Very often work needs to be supervised, and on very rare occasions we need to carry out what's called a translocation. So there may be water voles living in an area and the habitat may not be suitable, or that area may need to be opened up and cleared because it's not navigable. Occasionally we will need to carry out translocations, and we've done one of those so far. And this picture here is our water vole ecologist who holds the water vole licence, and he's weighing a water vole there that's been caught. So what we do is set baited traps out and we check them. I say we, it has to be done by a licensed ecologist. It's carried out by Mike. We check the traps morning and night, and if there's water voles in them, we weigh them and sex them and then move them to one of these pens, which is a soft release pen. So you put the water voles in the pen. It's like a little cage. What they don't realise at the time is that they can burrow out if they want to. It takes them a few days to realise that. So we put them in the soft release pen. They're then fed and watered twice a day. And then finally they realise that they can just do what instinct tells them to do, and they just burrow and they escape, and then they're out in their new home. So translocations do depend on having suitable habitat nearby which isn't already colonised, because they are territorial animals. So we can't put them in an area where there's already a really good water vole population. So I can go more into water voles later on.
Where do they get released, Pete? Is it still the same area of canal, or do they go to the Chopness Canal? Or?
It does depend, and it's been difficult because they do. In where we are, we have, like I say, we've got a regionally significant population of them. So if there is a suitable area for them to move into, the chances are they've already gone there. We do have a couple of areas. So Mike, who was on that photo a little while ago, he does carry out regular surveys. So he identifies suitable receptor sites. So we've got one in mind at the moment, which if we do have to carry out a translocation in March, we've got that site set up. But if they populate it, we'll have to find somewhere else. Hello, that's okay? So we were going to dig some, there's also an opportunity to possibly dig some ponds to move them to. Yeah.
They live in groups.
Sorry?
Does they live in groups?
They live in groups? No, not really. I mean, yeah, they do to a certain extent. So females will hold a territory. That territory can be around about 20 metres of canal bank or river bank or stream bank. And if another female wanders into that territory, they fight and they see each other off. And then males typically move up and down. So they don't live in colonies like some other animals. But it's important that they're able to move from their habitat to other habitats nearby. If you've got an isolated population where there may be 3 or 4 females living and they've got no connectivity to other habitats, then they can't go anywhere. So when they breed, their young have nowhere to go to. So they end up fighting. And if they stray too far away from suitable habitat and suitable cover, they're easy pickings for a whole host of predators. So hope that answers your question. Another way that we're assisting or we're contributing to the project is that we are carrying out the habitat improvements. A lot of the time it's planting hedgerows, so we're identifying places to plant hedgerows. A lot of this stuff is carried out by our wonderful volunteers. We've got at least one of them in the room at the corner there. Thanks for coming, Mike. But yeah, that's actually you there, isn't it? No, I don't think it is. No. But yeah, we're looking for opportunities. There's lovely reed beds and ponds that we're carrying out annual work on. Planting trees. This is actually a black poplar tree, which is probably the rarest tree native tree in the country. So we're looking for opportunities to plant those. Removal of invasive species. These plants, I'm sure a lot of you will recognise these. This is Himalayan Balsam. My section of the canal isn't too bad. It's quite well under control, but neighbouring areas have quite a lot. So it's very important that we stray to those areas and pull it up where we can so that it doesn't spread. And then we carry out monitoring. These guys are doing river fly surveys, so kick surveys in the nearby river to, it's basically a river health check. We also have monitoring groups doing botanical surveys to us. We have a a tree inspection group of volunteers that carry out tree surveys. So lots and lots of things that are going on. That's one of our lovely bat boxes that Stroud Valleys Project built and installed for us. So yeah, just some examples there. And yeah, this is just a reminder really of how some of those features are contributing. Because this is kind of what I kind of keep going back to this picture in my mind because I think this area is so lovely, and it kind of demonstrates what we're going for on the canal project. From a navigation point of view, fine, okay, there's some branches here that will have to be trimmed back, but we're working with the Canal Trust to not see these willow trees as a pain that need cutting down. They are a wonderful asset, and just by pruning the lower branches, maybe bringing back the historic rotation of pollarding them, just working with the trees rather than against them, and keeping them there because they are a wonderful feature of the canal. The open water is a lovely habitat, the marginal vegetation, the wildflower fringes, and then where we can, we're offering hedgerows planted along the towpath as well. And the towpaths that are being installed are accessible for wheelchairs and pushchairs, bicycles.
That made such a big difference. That used to be my commute to work.
Did you recognise that section?
Yeah, so I used to walk along there.
Oh, wow.
Trees screen all the industrial.
There's a big industrial estate the other side of those trees. And unfortunately, we're never far away from this thing, are we? So we've got the road noise sometimes when we're working. So it can be a really good screen. And that towpath going in means that people that work in those industrial estates that live nearby are able to step out of the door and experience the wonderful wildlife. Can't remember why I've got this slide now, but this is section 2. Do you remember at the beginning I showed you the 3 different sections, and section 2 was the middle one, which is the missing mile. And the red line indicates the original line of the canal, and the blue line represents the new channel that will be dug. So we've got planning permission to go ahead with that now, and as you can see, we're not able to follow the red line, unfortunately. That's because there's a motorway in the way. And also the A38 up there, a roundabout was built. For those of you that know the area, you'll know now that 4 years ago, some work was carried out on that roundabout, and now the canal channel goes through the middle of it. So that was a huge project that happened just before I started. So the missing mile will connect up with that roundabout, linking sections 1 and 3.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is that the river line?
Just under here, this line of mostly older trees, that's the river. So we're quite lucky in that we've already got an underpass under the M5 for the River Frome. And when you approach that, there is a footpath on the south bank. When you approach that, it's actually very, very wide under there. So the plan is that the river is going to be moved to the south, to the left, and the canal will run along the north side. There's only enough room for the river and the canal. There's not enough room for the towpath as well. So the towpath is going to follow this orange line. There's an access way along there for cattle. So that's where the towpath is going to go. Under the M5, yeah.
What sort of time scales are you looking at for being able to finish that?
It's been heavily delayed, and work is due to start soon. So it's likely that will probably now start in the spring. They're desperate to get in earlier. Landowner permission, planning permission, a lot of these things have been delayed. So I may not be able to oversee a lot of this while the Wildlife Trust are heavily involved in the project, but we have worked closely with the designers and the engineers to get a lovely profile. So even though this is a new channel that's being built, we're not going for the steel piles and the heavy concrete. It's all going to be that lovely clay banks, as and where possible. Some bits have to be hard engineering, but where possible, we're going for soft engineering.
Which is the land that Dale Vince, and is that right, that Dale Vince has donated a large area of land for this missing island?
Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about that. I don't know about the word donated either. I don't know whether that's true. I believe, I'm not 100% sure. I believe that Dale Vince owns this area. So this is the owner of Ecotricity and Forest Green Rovers. So I believe he owns some land up here. I think there's a stadium going up here somewhere. And it looks like some training pitches have gone on here. So I think that's that area, but don't quote me on that. Yeah, and then we come to the land that we're acquiring. So this is really, really exciting for me. I haven't been involved in a project before where we're creating new habitats. This is really wonderful. And at the beginning of the project, or before the project started, staff at the Wildlife Trust looked around the project area to look for land that has really, really good potential for habitat creation or habitat restoration. And actually, I used to see this as habitat creation, but a lot of what we're doing actually with the creation of wetland, that's actually restoration, because going back a long time, these fields would have been very, very wet. So we're kind of reverting them back to what they would have been a long time ago. But these two sites are between the villages of Whitminster and Eastington down here. This area I'm calling Drbridge at the moment. It's a lovely mosaic of habitats. We've got a traditional orchard, a species-rich grassland. Well, it's not massively species-rich at the moment, but it will be once we've finished with it. And some lovely flood meadows, which we are wetting up. I'll go into that in more detail. We're also looking at digging some ponds here and restoring this riverbank. So there's lots going on in this area. And over here, an area that we've purchased, which we're calling the Missing Mile wetland, because the Missing Mile is here. So it's going to lay adjacent to the Missing Mile. And that's very much a wetland project, which I'll talk about in a second. So this is an aerial view of the Drbridge site. This was taken, I think, from the colour of the trees, it looks like it's around about this time of year. Probably, so this would have been 2 years ago, I think. The traditional orchard we're restoring by pruning the trees, IDing what the trees are, because there's a lot of nice old Gloucestershire varieties of apples and pears. Yeah, carrying out grafting, scrub control. It was heavily covered in scrub when we took it on. Traditional orchards, Gloucestershire has lost over 75% of traditional orchards. Now that's mostly down to development, but a lot of it is actually down to just lack of management. If you don't manage these traditional orchards, the trees get overgrown, the ground gets covered in scrub, they end up getting lost and not seen as very valuable. So what we're doing is restoring it and making it, turning it into an asset for local people to come into and harvest it. We've put a permissive path through it, welcoming people, and built a field shelter in there. And the local primary school are very active, making some signs for us. They're having their harvest festival in there in the next couple of weeks. So we're turning it. It's already turned into a lovely space for the community and for wildlife as well. Some species of invertebrate especially, and bryophytes, so lichens and mosses, they really are drawn to old fruit trees and fungi as well, presumably as well. Then we've got the species-rich grassland next door. This little field in the corner hasn't been as heavily grazed over the last however many decades. So there's a lot of good species in there, and even in the last 3 years they're spreading into the grassland. So we're already seeing that some of the modifications we did early on, like mostly installing stock fencing, is having a really good benefit. So we've reduced the grazing on this site, and with the introduction of the fencing, we're able to fence off the riverbank to protect it, so that it's not grazed and poached by the cattle. And also we can manage where the cattle are grazing, and we can keep them out of certain areas at certain times of the year. And that's a really, really important conservation tool to be able to manage what livestock we're having and where they're allowed. And in this low land over here, we're digging some water vole ponds. I should call them wildlife ponds, but they're being designed for water voles, to be honest with you. They're going to be absolutely wonderful. And this area, I mentioned that I'm seeing this more as a restoration, because years and years ago, and you're probably going back 200 years or so, the River Frome here would have probably meandered across this landscape, and when it flooded, when there was a lot of rainwater, the river would have rose, and these fields would have been very, very wet, and they would have been an absolutely wonderful feeding ground for wetland birds, but lots of other species as well. You can almost see, I think you can actually see the River Severn in this photo. So we're not far away from the Severn estuary from here. So when the tide comes in, all of those lovely feeding grounds for birds are hidden. So they go to other places like our other reserves, Coombe Hill, Ashelworth Ham, Slimbridge, which is owned by the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, and this will complement those sites. So how do we create a wetland here? What we did this time last year, before that, we came up with a design to dig some scrapes. Scrapes are pools that are dug in the ground, but not very deep. It's just scraping away the top surface of the soil up to about 1/2 metre, so anything between 30 and 40 centimetres. You take away the topsoil and you expose the clay underneath, and then those areas fill up with either rainwater or water that overspills from the river. So this was the design. How do we achieve that? Do we get in a big excavator, like a big JCB or a big digger? Well, there's actually one machine in the country that's designed to do this task, and it's called the Drbridge rotary ditcher. Sorry if the pronunciation's wrong. A huge machine which is, it's like a big cylinder with a barrel inside it that spins round, and it's armed with these big teeth, and the driver of the tractor operates it, and as the tractor drives forwards, he can lower it down and raise it up, and as it lowers down, it digs into the surface of the soil, and it churns up the soil and spits it out of that big chute, and it spits it out up to 50 metres away. So we're able to create those scrapes much faster than if we had even 10 excavators on site probably. So a really good asset to have. This ditcher appeared in September last year. It spent about 5 or 6 days with us, and it created a wonderful network of 9 pools connected with this shallow ditch. So quite good for 5 or 6 days work, really. You can just see it there. So this is just as he's finishing off. That's my truck there. So it gives you an idea of the scale. Now in this picture, this was taken in September. We got a bit of rainfall, not a huge amount, but we got a bit of rainfall at the end of September. Some of these scrapes are just starting to fill up with a little bit of water. So they do start to fill up if we get a reasonable amount, but we'll see a real difference when we get a prolonged, longer period of heavy rainfall. So we're hoping that most winters is going to look like this. And this was January. Already you can see the big, not piles of spoil, it's quite thin, the spoil is. But you can see it's not really established, this habitat at this point. But we're already seeing lapwing and curlew visiting. And I found, just from visiting this area most days as part of my role, I was noticing suddenly I was seeing a lot of different wildlife on the fields that I wouldn't usually see. Some geese came and spent a few weeks on the fields. Loads of gulls, swans and ducks swimming around. It will come into its own in. I do apologise about that. It will come into its own in the winter time. It's quite dry in the summertime, and we're managing it with grazing. So for the other site, the site between the A38 and the M5, the missing mile wetland, this was what it looked like in January. It does get very, very wet, but there's a large area here that would have been very, very wet a long time ago. So we're looking at opportunities to create some features there. So it may be that we do some more scrapes. It may be that we dig some ponds, create a reed bed. So we've got, it's got great potential. So plans are still in the pipeline for that. Yes.
Have there been any thoughts about allowing the river to find its own route through?
Absolutely, yeah. And in an ideal world, we would. These are big flood banks built with clay. And in an ideal world, should I say it? We'd remove them all. I know Emma probably agrees with me. But yeah, for whatever reason we can't. There's a lot of complications, and people with a lot more experience than me are working on these things. So there's something called flood modelling, which unfortunately any changes that you do to a floodplain, it has to be flood modelled. You have to have planning permission to do that. Those things are being worked on at the moment. So as well as looking at how can we improve this best for the habitats and the wildlife, we also have to do what we're legally allowed to do without causing, flooding to other people's land. So it's complicated. Was there another hand? Yeah.
Are you managing the water levels at all, or is it just natural inflow and outflow?
Onto our site.
On the scrapes?
On the scrapes, at the moment, that is completely sealed off from the river. So that's rainwater only, that is. There's an area here and an area up here where the ditch goes very, very close to the riverbank. Again, for the same reasons, yeah, would love to put some explosives in there and blow up the floodbank. I didn't say that, but planning permission is going in to remove these areas so that when the river rises to a certain level, probably around the level that it is in this photo, it will spill in and top these scrapes up.
So that should alleviate flooding downstream?
It may do, it may not. There are people in this room that can answer that question better than me, so it's complicated. Everything has to be run through a model, unfortunately. So I could say that it should be better, but there's data to suggest otherwise, unfortunately. But yes, our full intention is that we modify the flood bank in that area to get those fields wetter, and in the missing mile wetland as well. And this is the same map that I showed earlier, just to give you an idea of where we are. Those two red dots are the two sites that the Wildlife Trust will be inheriting, I suppose is the word, acquiring, and they will be new reserves. So if you're members, you probably get that booklet with all of the reserves in. These two will be in there as well come the end of our involvement in the project. I haven't left much time to talk about the wildlife, have I? I could do the full hour on wildlife. So it's important that we work with the people that are going to be managing the canal long term, because we can have as big an influence on the project as we want, but ultimately when we step away, the Cotswold Canal Trust, among maybe a couple of other organisations, will be responsible for managing the canal. So part of my job is actually educating and working with them and encouraging them to protect the wonderful habitats that we're creating. And they're on board, I must say. It's very, very positive from their end. So this is just a sample of some of the wonderful wildflowers that like the wetter areas. So the zone that I call the Riparian Zone, the marginal vegetation, Cotswold Canals Trust are committed to keeping at least 1.5 metres of that vegetation along both banks of the canal ideally, but always on one bank. And what that offers is a food for the pollinating insects, but also cover for a huge range of other species, and a corridor for plants and animals to travel up and down. Because if you've got that picture that I showed you of Bonds Mill earlier, with the nice trees, the open water, the riparian habitat, the hedgerows, if you've got all of that, that's as good a habitat as we've got on a lot of our reserves. You could be looking at a 4.5 mile long wildlife reserve if it's done correctly and if it's managed correctly. So it's really, really important. Anyway, here are some of the species. Did anyone want to shout out? It's an informal talk, isn't it? Does anyone recognise any of these? Looks a bit like a dock, but it's a water dock. Very amazing for wildlife. Does anyone know what this plant is? Himalayan Balsam, yeah. So some of these pictures will be non-native invasives, I'm afraid. This is something we're not encouraging. This is something we're pulling up the moment we see it, and I don't know how many hundreds of hours of volunteer time we've done. We've accumulated just tackling this one species, but it's not welcome along the canal. Yes?
I'm just wondering why it's not welcome. What does it do?
Oh, how long have we got? 15 more minutes. Oh,
Sorry.
it's going to be tricky to cover it. They are native to the Himalayas. They absolutely love this climate, and they outcompete all of our other species. So if you have an area with all of these other lovely species growing here, if Himalayan balsam gets in, it will grow faster than them. It will grow way, you saw how tall they can grow, up to 12 feet, I believe. And they outshade them. They outcompete them for nutrients and water. So the chances are you'll get nothing growing where there's Himalayan balsam growing. It will just be Himalayan balsam. And in watercourses, especially rivers and streams, what you're then left with, they're an annual, so they die down in sort of October, November time, and they leave the banks totally exposed. So you've just got bare earth on the banks. And then what happens in November, December, January, we usually get a lot of rain, a lot of floods, the bank ends up getting eroded. Whereas if you've got plants, even like nettles and brambles, their root systems hold the banks together. So we'd much rather some perennial plants and our native species than that. And also it will just take over. So there are some satellite images that I've looked on recently where the riverbanks are completely pink. And it's because Himalayan balsam has just set in, and underneath that, come September, October time, there'll be nothing else living. Have I gone into that enough? Anyway, purple loose strife, loads of water mint at the moment. I don't know if it's a really good year for it, but I'm seeing loads. Hemlock water dropwort, greater willow herb, yellow flag iris. Not a very good picture, but this is cuckoo flower. We had a lot of this in the spring. A wonderful species to see. Now in our meadow that I showed you a picture of earlier, the end of our grassland, we had a really good display of a flower that's a bit of a mouthful. It's called corky fruited water droplet. So that's either that's had a really good year or it's making a really good recovery along our canal, because we had absolutely loads of it this June. It was good. And then, yeah, other plant species. Alder are by far the most common tree that we get along the canal, followed by willow. So very valuable food source for a huge range of insects. I used to call this bulrush, and then I called it reed mace, and now I'm calling it cat's tail. What's it officially called, Emma? Typha. Thank you. Typha. So I'm on its fourth name now. I think bulrush is acceptable, isn't it?
But yeah, bulrush is the American
Oh.
word.
Oh well,
but
definitely
it's
not
one
then.
that- So it used to be really sneered upon.
Yeah.
Because it was the American version of what is reed mace in this country.
Reed mace.
But
Yeah.
actually it's become so, used by people that actually it's become less sniffy.
Yeah.
Like all things, we understand that actually when things have common names and names we can remember,
Yeah.
things we relate to.
Yeah. And common names can change, can't they? If more and more people are calling them a different name, then it
And
becomes a
actually,
common name.
You showed cuckoo flower,
Oh no.
milkmaids, or it has
Lady
probably,
smock, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
3 or 4 different
Yeah, of
words
course.
that we would all use.
So I might use some names that are probably technically incorrect, and Emma, you're welcome to correct me, okay? That's absolutely fine. Glyceria, branched reed, I think it's called. Common reed, not a huge amount of this actually. I grew up with this species in Norfolk. There's, it's everywhere, but there's bits of it along the canal. All good food for water voles actually. One of my volunteers recently saw a water vole collecting willow leaves and taking them back and nibbling on those. So I think they'll eat anything if it's green. And then, what's happened to my invertebrate slide? It's been eaten by these guys. There's some invertebrates on here. But yeah, those might come onto it in a little while. But really important. Even just open water can be a really good habitat, as long as the water's a fairly good quality. I had a bucket in my garden in the summertime because we were getting rain, the water butts were filling up, and I wanted to store a bit more water, so I put some in some quite large buckets. And I went to use them to water the garden, and there were thousands of little water fleas, little Daphnia, in the buckets. And I thought, how the heck did that get in there? Apparently, water boatmen or back swimmers, they have these fine hairs on their bodies, on their abdomens, and when they're swimming through the silt, they pick up the eggs of Daphnia, and then when they fly to find another habitat, the eggs drop off. So I think I'd only left this bucket there about a week, and there was already life in it. So yeah, open water can be a wonderful habitat. So a huge amount of birds. I can't name them all. But grey wagtails, they actually nest in, I've seen them nest in lock gates that are operational, that are moving. I've seen grey wagtails hop down and use them while they're actually moving. So I see a lot of these over in this area and along the canal. Kingfishers and swans are like the celebrities of the canal, aren't they? We get a lot of moorhens. We don't get many coots for some reason, don't know why. But moorhens are really common around here. House martins, swifts, swallows, must mention bats. I know they're not birds, but feed off all of of course, the larvae of species like mosquito live in the canal, and then when they hatch, they provide food for these guys. Grey heron, everyone knows what a heron looks like. Lots of warblers. I think this one's a chiff-chaff, but we've got probably 4 or 5 species of warbler that live along the canal, in the reeds and in the willows. A water rail, I heard one of those the other day. We get them come in in the winter time, typically where I work. And I heard the first one about 4 days ago. So maybe it's just early. Maybe it's just claiming its habitat nice and early. You wouldn't normally see these in the canal. These are species that you'd normally get in rivers and bigger lakes. This is a goosander. However, we do have goosander in the Stroudwater Canal. They come in winter time. We do see a few. So maybe a stop-off point on its migration. Fish. A lot of wildlife enthusiasts know their birds, don't they? They'll see a blue tit, a robin, a blackbird, and they'll recognise it. But I think these guys are as important, aren't they, to the UK ecology? So there's just a handful of species. It's difficult to know how many species we've got of freshwater fish species living in the UK. I think it's between 40 and 50 species. It's quite a lot. Lots of those are non-native invasives. There's one non-native invasive on this screen. Don't know if any of you know which one it is. The carp, yeah. So carp are from Asia, and they don't originate in the UK. So they were introduced a very, very long time ago, but they were still introduced. So eel and bullhead, we actually caught these while we were doing kick samples, looking for invertebrates. European eel, critically endangered species that live in the canal. I think the most common are probably roach, followed by perch, which is this one. Beautiful animals, stripy, big spiky dorsal fin, red fins, really stunning animals, but we hardly ever see them, do we, because they're underwater. And pike, of course, they're like the predator of the canal and rivers. So these are species, tench in the middle, stickleback here. So these are species that will live in slower waters or still waters. You wouldn't necessarily get a lot of these animals in faster flowing rivers. That's just some of them as well. We'll have plenty of other species of fish. And I'm not going into, I'm already almost running out of time, and there's amphibians, reptiles. There's so many species that make the canal their home that I can't go into them all. So I've just tried to take a snippet. I have deleted my invertebrate slide by accident. I don't know where it's gone. But there are some lovely photos here. So after the talk, feel free to come and have a closer look at those. These were all taken on the same day next to the canal. So 18 different species there to look at. Does anyone know which the non-native invasive is on this screen? People at the front pointing straight to it. Yeah. So the top two are like the celebrities. They're the ones that usually I get a lot of questions about. Obviously been working quite closely with water voles on the project. And it's been an absolute pleasure, and they're wonderful animals. Absent from 97% of their original habitats, from their original territories in the UK. So really, really on the brink. We have to be very, very careful. Luckily on the canal, we're being very responsible, but that needs to be nationwide. Lovely family of otters there. This was taken by one of my volunteers in Stroud. They are sometimes... So I've been working on the project 3 years, and I've not seen an otter since I've been working on the project. If you see them, it's probably because they're happy to be seen. They know you're there, and they're happy to come out and because they feel safe, probably. And for that reason, I think you're probably more likely to see them in towns than in the countryside. They seem to be more used to people in towns, so they're more used to where people stick to, where the dogs are staying, and they've got the safety in the water. So very often they're playing in the water, and some people are lucky enough to see them and observe that. I haven't been, not recent. I've seen them elsewhere, but not since I've been working on this project. Brown rats. So if you see something rat sort of size swimming in a canal, a ditch, a pond, then it could be a rat, it could be a water vole. They look similar if you really get a very, very quick glimpse. The main difference is that water voles have a blunter snout. I think they're a little bit chubbier as well. They look a little bit chubbier. A shorter tail as well. They're the main differences if you had to ID them quickly. An American mink, yeah, so if we're doing any water vole work and we're getting a license to do anything, we have to ensure that we are monitoring mink numbers, and I'm happy to say that we don't have any mink living on the Stroudwater Canal. So very pleased about that. They'll eat a huge range of wildlife. They're not native, that's the main point here, that they're North American. So species like water vole, like some of our bird species like moorhen, they haven't evolved to defend themselves against American mink. So that's why we can't let them populate. And as part of my role, I monitor mink, and I use monitoring rafts and I use monitoring cameras. And I just thought I'd finish on a nice slide where I'm showing off basically some of the wonderful animals that live along the canal. So the cameras are all very, very close to the canal, and these are a bit blurry, but I'm not trying to get the best quality images. I'm using them to record what I've got. So as long as the images are good enough to ID, then I'm happy enough. Yeah, fox. Bizarrely, I had the camera pointing up a little bit too high, and I accidentally got some branches of a tree, and a barn owl happened to come and land in the tree. So I was really lucky to get that image. I think that's a little egret. Badger, stoat over there, weasel down here. Couple of differences. Weasels are generally smaller and they don't have a black tip to their tail. Water vole. So you see there, it's got a shorter tail. A rat's tail would be much longer, and a rat would have a pointier nose and bigger ears.
Is that one out at night then? I didn't realise they were not.
Yeah, you see them out at night as well. So dawn and dusk is a good time to see them. But I've certainly got quite a few images of them at night. Yeah, that's not a very good picture. That's actually a polecat. A polecat turned up. I think it was on the move because I didn't see it again. But yeah, we were lucky enough to get a polecat image. Hedgehog and a roe deer. So yeah, I've been really lucky to get those images. Oh, and then I think I'm gonna finish, and I'm gonna say yeah, thank you to everyone who turned up. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased. I was worried. There's been some amazing talks in this room, these lunchtime talks, and I thought, well, who's going to want to come and listen to canals? Bit boring in relation to some of them, on fungi and pine martins. Bird ringing, all of that kind of thing. So I hope you've found it reasonably interesting. Must thank my volunteers. These guys supplied some of the wonderful images. So thank you to the volunteers.